Hello, thank you for staying with us first of all. And if you've just joined us for the first time, welcome aboard. Now this is the second instalment of the Knitting Craftalong. So this is a live hour, there's no repeat. I am here now, right away. Now what I'm going to say to you straight away is please, please, please go and grab your kit if you started last week. Also grab yourself a pen. I'll explain why a little bit later, but you might want to make one or two little notes as well. But I've got another announcement to make as well. So while you're grabbing those things, if anybody missed out and they didn't get the first kit because it did sell out, so we're going to continue with that first kit, but you love the idea of maybe learning a new craft if you've never knitted before, if you've had a go and you've failed, maybe this is a time to try again. What we've got for you is a brand new Craftalong. Now this starts on the 7th of August, but the kit is available now. This is going to run over 3 weeks. And what we've done for you here, we've given you, or we will be giving you, 2 different shades of yarn. I think colours may vary, I'm not too sure about that, but also your metal knitting needles are included in there as well. So we've got a really lovely quality yarn. I believe this is an Aran weight as well. You're going to get the instructions and the pattern. And of course, we're going to talk you through that. We're going to hold your hand the whole way through the whole process, which is absolutely wonderful. And then you're going to be able to knit yourself a little bobble hat there. Now, we've got 2 different versions here. I believe, you know, when it comes to it, we'll probably be able to give you the choice there. But if you're starting from the beginning, probably the plainer one is the one you'll go with. You'll probably have enough yarn left over to make something else as well, or maybe make both of them. But definitely get your kit now. Item number you need is 337959. Yeah, order that now. That will be shipped out to you. Then you can be ready in advance for the 7th of August. Let's get over to the website though, because we've got more goodies available there as well. There's your kit. It's only £7. Now have a look at the knitting needle set as well. We've got a great kit there. I've had a look at this. This is brilliant. This is a lovely metal kit. It's rather posh as well in a very nice case. You've also got your quick locking stitch markers. They're like little safety pins. They come in for your crochet and your knitting actually. The yarn holder is brilliant. I was using that last week. In fact, I'm going to use it again this week. I need one of those. It's absolutely fantastic. We've got mugs, we've got books, we've got all sorts of goodies for you. We've got bags as well. So, are you ready? Have you got your kit? Are you ready to go? Have you done your homework? If you haven't, oh, tut, tut, tut. Let me give you a reminder. I might just repeat 1 or 2 things. We'll see how we go on. For anybody that missed out last week, if you've not been able to get it on rewind or you didn't record, there is still chance to sort of pick up on where we started, because we will repeat some of the stitches. Now, if you're totally, totally brand new to knitting, last week we started with casting on. We did the knit stitch, we did the purl, and we also did the increase. Now, I did set your homework and I said if you could please get to row number 14. So we look down the pattern. There's actually quite a lot of rows here and you're probably thinking, how are we going to manage to finish this? But you are. 10 to 14 was the last instruction. So rows 10 to 14 were all exactly the same. So you're going to knit and purl alternately. And that is a stocking stitch. So another thing I just want to explain to you all as well is the yarn that you got in your kits was a chenille. Now you would have got sort of the dark grey and also the creamy colour as well. Now when I'm demoing, I'm going to be using a completely different yarn. The reason for that, and I did say this last week and I explained why, but I think 1 or 2 of you might have missed out at the beginning of the show and didn't understand why. So just to explain again, if we look at the lovely chenille here, it looks almost like a bit of fabric. If I flip that over, you can't really make out the stitches as I'm working them on air. So I worked with a completely different yarn just to make it clear how the stitches will look. So this is the knit side. And if I turn that around, there is your purl side. So you can see there's a big, big difference. So it just makes it easier for you to see. You might have also noticed that I'm using a slightly larger knitting needle. That doesn't matter, it's just because I've got a different yarn. That's the only reason for that. But the stitches, the instructions are exactly the same. Now, I did also start making up the white version. And I did say to you last week, if you wanted to kind of do a stripe in your cat, because it's the cat that we're making, it doesn't look much like one at the moment, then you could do. But we have discovered that the white is a little bit chunkier than the darker colour. So if you've started with one colour, you can either continue with that, complete the whole process. You will find, I'm sure, if your tension isn't too loose, that you've got enough to make more than one cat, so you could have one black one and one white one. Okay, so we're going to get going. Now, I might backtrack a little bit, but also make sure you've got that pen handy, because there is something I do want to let you know about as well. So let's get the knitting needles out. I'm going to use the yarn holder actually. This is really, really good. If you've not got one of these already, this is brilliant. I just untangle that little bit of yarn there, stick this onto my yarn holder, make sure it's sat on there nicely. Then when I use the yarn, that is going to pull and it's going to spin around, and that means I'm not going to get all tangled up. So we finished, or you finished, at row 14 if you did your homework. So I want to move on to the next row. Now in brackets at the end of the rows, you'll see a number. So you can see rows 10 to 14, 24. So you should have 24 stitches on your needle. That's where you're at the moment. So we're going to move on to row number 15. Now, last week, if we just look a little bit further back, if we go back a few rows, you can see we were increasing. So if you were following along, you know how to do that. If you did miss that, we will be increasing again later on in the pattern. So if you're just watching for the time being, you can still pick up those stitches. But we're going to here, it says K2 TOG. That is an abbreviation. You probably can work it out actually, but it's an abbreviation to knit two together. So the K stands for knit. The 2 is the number of stitches, and the TOG is short for together. So that's quite easy, isn't it? Knit 2 together, then it's K, so knit to the last 2 stitches and then knit 2 together again. So we've started with 24. Because we're knitting 2 together, we're losing a stitch at the beginning of the row and we're losing a stitch at the end of the row. So that is bringing our number down to 22. So let's get going. I'm just going to move my yarn spinner to the other side, because I'm right-handed, so I'm going to hold in my left hand the needle with the stitches on. And what we're going to do is transfer all those stitches over into the other needle. So if I'm right-handed, start with the left hand, transfer to the right. It'll be the opposite way if you're left-handed. So because we're knitting 2 together straight away, that is very easy to do. We're going to take our needle, and if you were following along, you'll know very easily now how to do the knit stitch. But 2 together, quite simple. We're just going to go into the second stitch with our needle there, you can see that, but we're also going to take that into our first stitch as well. So you go under the second stitch first. Being a knit stitch, you take the empty needle, as it is at the moment, behind the needle that's holding all those stitches, so you form that cross. I'm then going to take the yarn, I'm going to wrap it around the cross, give it a little tug so it sits nicely in between the 2 needles. And then I'm going to pull that needle through, picking up the loop that I've just made, which is also picking up those 2 stitches. And I'm going to slide those 2 stitches off my needle. So I've now got 1 stitch on my needle. We'll do that again. So now if you do ever drop any stitches, try and pick them up as quickly as possible. If anybody needs to ask questions, do email in as well. studio@thecraftstore.com. I'm going to try and go at a nice pace for you. You will get homework again, but it's going to be nice and easy for you. But I will repeat processes as well. So if anybody didn't see or didn't quite catch it, you still got another chance at this. So all stitches on 1 needle. We're going to knit 2 together. So I'm going to take the empty needle. I'm going to put the point of it through the stitch and also through the first stitch. So that's the second stitch down and the first stitch. This is your knitting 2 together. So you take your yarn, you've formed the cross because that empty needle has gone behind the needle with the stitches on it. You're going to take that yarn around and through the cross, just tug it slightly so it's sitting nicely between the 2 needles. You're then going to slide that needle down so it's picking up the loop that you've just created, and then you're going to slide off those 2 stitches together. Shall we do that one more time just to make sure? Okay, we'll do it one more time. So I'm just unpulling the stitches. If you've got it, do not unpull your stitches. Just wait for the next step. This is just for people that, you know, might be a little bit confused or a little bit stuck. Just making sure I pick that stitch up. There we are. Right, so let's go again. So empty needle, we're knitting 2 together. So we start with the second stitch down from the top of the needle. I'm just going to go through with the point of the needle, through the first stitch as well, crossing the needles over. So you've got the cross there. Take the yarn, you're taking it around the back of that bottom needle so it's in between where they cross over. You then take the needle, slide it down to pick up that loop that you've just created, and then you take the 2 stitches off together. That is your knit 2 together. Now it's pretty easy because now it says knit to last 2 stitches and then knit 2 together again. So obviously your single knit stitch, you're going to go into your stitch, forming the cross again, yarn around, pick up that loop, slide it off your needle, into the stitch, yarn around, in between the cross, pull that through, pick up the loop, slide it off your needle. And we're going to complete that process right the way down until we get to the last 2 stitches, because of course we've got to knit 2 together at the end as well. So as I just speed up a little bit, if you can manage to get to the end of this row as well, the more you practice, the faster you can actually get. I'm still going at quite a slow pace really for you here, but when we get to the end here, we're going to do the purl stitch for the next row, but I do want to make sure that you can see the knit 2 together right at the end of row 15, which is the one we're starting with today. Now, if you want to count as you go along, you can do. If you don't drop any stitches and you started with the right number, you should find, if you've of course knitted 2 together at the beginning, when you get to the end and you do the final knit 2 together, you should then have 22 stitches transferred over to your other needle. Now I'm down now to the last 2 stitches. So we're going to knit these 2 together. It's exactly the same as the way that we started. This is the top of the needle. So we start with the second needle from the top, the second stitch from the top. So we're going to go into that stitch, but we're also going to go into the first stitch on the needle as well. So I've got both of those together, yarn around in between the 2 needles, and again we're going to slide that to pick up the loop and take that away from the needle. So all of those stitches are now transferred onto the opposite needle. Just to double check, you should have 22 stitches, so I'm going to count in 2s, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22 stitches. So I know I'm right. Now, if I just lay this down so you can see, when we started last week, we started with the cast on stitches. There is a little bit more casting on later in the pattern, so anybody that missed that, you will be able to catch up on that later. We then started with the increase, so you can see on both sides, because you increase at the beginning and also at the end, you get those diagonal lines coming out. Then we had a little bit of straight stitch where we didn't increase or decrease, so you can see that has gone a little bit straighter there. Now we're starting to decrease. So you're going to see those sides coming back in now. So you'll start to see that happen. Right, now the next row, if we look at rows 16 to 18, it's given us the instructions for 3 rows all at once, 16, 17 and 18. And it says, starting with a P, that's the purl row, work your stocking stitch, and you've still got 22 stitches there because you're not decreasing, you're not increasing. Now, last week I did say that when you do a row of knit, which we've just done, and then you do a row of purl, the 2 combined give you stocking stitch. Now that we're starting again, because we've just done a knit row, you can see this is why I wanted to use a different yarn, so it's very clear. This is what it looks like on your purl side. So we're now going to do the purl. There are no increases, no decreases, so you don't have to worry about that. So the first row, which is 16, is going to be our purl. Now it is a little bit different to the knit, and I'm sure you can remember because if you've done your homework you will have been practicing this, but we take the empty needle and we're going to come in to the stitch from the opposite direction. So if we were knitting, we tend to go in from the bottom of the stitch. So we're coming in more from the top of the stitch, and we're keeping that empty needle in front of the needle with the stitches on it. So I've formed a cross again, but it's the opposite way around. We take that yarn and once again we wrap it around the needle, but it's going around that front needle this time. So you're forming a loop that falls in between the two needles, but it is kind of in reverse to the stitch. Exactly the same way you pull that needle through and pick up the loop, which you can see there, and then you take that stitch off. I will do that one more time. As I say, we have done this lots of times now, but for anybody that's catching up, maybe missed last week, or is just interested in watching how the stitches form, then this is for you. So coming in from the top of the stitch, we're going to put the needle through the stitch there, forming the cross, take the yarn, wrap it around the needle, so you've got that loop in between. You're then going to slide that needle, picking the loop up, and when you can see that, you just take off from the needle where you've got those stitches. And being a purl row, every single one of these stitches is exactly the same. So I'm going in from the front of the stitch, I'm making the cross, I'm wrapping the yarn around, I'm sliding that needle, that stitch off the needle that's holding the majority at the moment of those stitches. There are no increases, no decreases, so we're going to go right to the very end of the row. I'm sorry if I'm making sort of tapping sounds with my needles here. I'm trying to hold this out in front of me a little bit. Normally I'd have this closer to my body, so this is why I'm tapping onto the table. Obviously you do what's comfortable to you. With demonstrating, I am sat at a little bit of an awkward angle, but it doesn't matter. As long as you can see what I'm doing, that's all that matters. Now what I do find is the more you take those stitches from one needle to the other, you'll find that the stitches start creeping a little bit to the end of the needle. So do sort of move those down as you need to. Don't worry about that. They will slide up and down on your needle. So what you don't want is all the stitches right on the very end, because that's when you're more likely to drop them. Now, I'm not going to do it right at this minute, but there might be a point where if you do drop a stitch, I'll try and help you, show you a way of picking that up, just so that you don't lose all of your work. So that's a purl row. So if we go back to the instructions, row number 16 we were on there, so it's 16 to 18. Starting with a purl row, you're going to work the stocking stitch. No increase, no decrease. So we've done the purl, we've done as it says, so we know the next row is going to be our knit, which will count as row number 17, because 16 was the purl, 17 is going to be a knit, 18 is going to be another purl. So to the knit stitch, we're going back from underneath the stitch again now. This is where the cross of the needle is, so the empty needle goes to the back. And we're just going to repeat the process. So every single stitch on this row is now a knit. So if you're keeping up, we can get right to the end of this row, doing exactly the same thing. And this, as I say, is row number 17. So I'll just speed up a little bit. Number 18, if you're whizzing ahead, if you've been practicing and you're really whizzing ahead, you know that row number 18 is going to be your purl row before we start to decrease again. So we'll get to the end of that and we'll do another decrease row, and then I'm going to set you some homework. Now make sure you've got that pen handy as well, because there is something that we need to do as well when it comes to the pattern. Some of you eagle-eyed people might have spotted something. If you've never knitted before, the chances are you haven't. Okay, so I've finished the knit row. I'll just lay that down again there. You can see how that shape is starting to come together. You're not really seeing the decrease too much yet, because we've only done it one time, but the more we do that, the more we're going to see that. So we're now on to the row number 18, which is the final one of the instruction line that we're currently on. So we're back to that purl. So we're coming in from the top of the stitch, crossing that needle over, taking the yarn end, wrapping it around the needle, pick up that loop, and then slide from the needle with all the stitches on it, and repeat that all the way around. So from the top of the stitch, just going to rest that on the table, yarn around, pick up the loop, slide off the needle. Top of the stitch, yarn around, pick up the loop, slide off the needle. and you'll start to see that your work is growing quite nicely now as well. So I'm just going to speed up a little bit just to finish that pearl row. As I do that, don't forget we have got other things for sale as well. I'm using the yarn spinner, we've got the needles for you as well, so do have a look at those things. Also, don't forget, if you are loving the look of the Craftalongs, we've got various ones that are running at the moment. The crochet is on a Thursday with myself. Hayley's got 3 running at the moment, I believe. We'd had Paul the Penguin last night, I mean. Don't forget with the knitting, if you've missed out on this kit, because it did sell out, you can go for the new kit, which is going to start, or the course will start on the 7th of August. Did I hear the colours won't vary? Right, these are the colours you're going to get, and this is 100% acrylic double knit, I believe, rather than an Aran. You do get metal needles though, which is really, really good. So for that price of £7, you're getting quality products there. So you're going to get a lovely, lovely finish. Full instructions, but of course we're going to hold your hand right the way through that. 337959 is the item number. So you can get yourself ready for the 7th of August right now. Okay, back to this one. So we're now up to row number 18. We've just completed that. Row 19 says knit 2 together, knit to last 2 stitches, knit 2 together again. So we're repeating really exactly what we did in row 15, except we'd already lost 2 stitches by decreasing there, so we're losing another 2. So we're going from 22 down to 20 stitches. So we'll do that row again. So this is row number, what did I say, 19, didn't I? So knit 2 together, and because we're knitting, and you can always tell by looking at the stitches, it's almost like if you look this way, like little plaits running up. That's the only way I can think of describing that. The little V's look like little plaits, and on the purl side, you see almost a ripple effect. So it's very different. So that's how you can tell. Also, another way of being able to tell, if you do get a little bit mixed up, I'm on a purl or I'm on a knit, it's working out on this pattern that your knit stitches are on your odd number rows and your purls are on your even number rows. So that's something to watch out for as well. So row number 19, knit 2 together, very easy, we've already done it. So we count down to the 2nd stitch on the needle. We're going to go in from the bottom of the stitch. We're also going to go into the top stitch as well, because we're knitting these 2 together. You are crossing those needles over, so make sure that your empty needle is to the back of the needle holding all the stitches. We're going to take that yarn, we're going to cross it around, wrap it around that back needle, bringing it down in between the cross. We're then going to take the empty needle, pick up that loop that we've just made, and then we're going to slide those 2 stitches off together. So we've just again knitted 2 stitches together. We're then going to go to the end of the row, all with knit stitches. So it's always from the bottom of the stitch, cross the needle over, take the yarn round, pick up the loop and slide off the needle. And we're transferring every single stitch again over onto the opposite needle until we get to the last 2 stitches. Remember, you've got to knit 2 together again. So wait until you get to the last 2, and then you're going to do exactly what we did at the beginning, but at the end of the road. End of the road, end of the row. I'm listening to the scores in my ear at the same time here, you know. It's rather exciting. It's more exciting watching this though, so don't go anywhere. Right, I'm whizzing through to the end of the row, get to the last 2 stitches, and then we'll knit those 2 together again. And then I'm going to go through something else with you. So we've got the last 2 stitches. So again, because it's a knit row, we're going to go into the 2nd stitch first, the one furthest from the top of the needle, into the stitch, into the other stitch at the same time. We're going to wrap around because that needle's at the back, pick up the loop and slide those 2 stitches off that needle. We've now again completely transferred all stitches onto our what was an empty needle. So you can see now, you can see where we've gone a little bit straighter and then we're starting to come in. You're starting to see some shaping. Now I'm just going to go through something on the pattern here with you. And I'm going to hold my hands up and say, this is my fault. because I spotted a little error. It doesn't matter to the instructions because the instructions are correct. In the brackets at the end of each row, we've got the amount of stitches that you should have. So we've just completed row number 19. We should now have 20 stitches, that is correct. Rows 20 to 22, which is actually 3 rows because you've got row 20, 21 and 22, so that's your 3 rows. You're going to work starting with a purl row, so it's that stocking stitch again, no increase, no decrease, so you've still got those 20 stitches. Then we're going to knit 2 together in the way that we just have done. Right at the beginning, knit to the end, knit 2 together, so we're repeating the process, we're coming down by another 2 stitches. Okay, so that follows. Then we're back to that stocking stitch, rows 24 to 26, no decrease, no increase, so you've still got the 18 stitches. Yeah, ignore that little dash, don't know why that's there. Now you're going to, again, at row 27, you're going to knit 2 stitches together, knit to the last 2 stitches, knit 2 together. So again, we've lost a stitch at either end, so it brings you down to 16. Rows 28 to 32, you're going to go purl, knit, purl. So you're remaining with the 16 stitches. This is where the error is. It's this number 14 here. So the instruction that is coming up is correct. We are back to row 33. We're going to increase a stitch. Now I'm going to show you this now. You don't need to do this. For anybody that was following last week or missed out, because we've just done a decrease, I'm going to go over the increase again. Don't do this at home until you get to that row, but I'm just going to give you instructions. But if you notice here, we're increasing 1 stitch, knitting to the last stitch, and then we're increasing again. So I've taken 2 off. You want to add 2 on. So with your pens, if you change that to a number 18, just change that. The instructions are correct. You don't have to do anything there. It is literally just the bracket number. Because then you're doing stocking stitch, the next one should also be 18. Then we're increasing again, so that will be 20, 20, 22, 22, and then we start to get correct again because we're going to start knitting together and start decreasing again. So I'm not going to whiz ahead too far. Your homework for this week is to continue with the lines that we've just been working with. So where did we get up to? We got up to, was it 19 we've just done? It was number 19 where we've just knitted 2 together, so you should have 20 stitches. Let me double check that. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. Yes, we've got 20 stitches. So row 19 is correct. 20, we're starting with that purl row. 21 is going to be a knit row. 22 is going to be another purl row. So I am just going to do 1 purl row again so I can get back to a knit row. You can follow me with this one because it would be row number 20. So remember with your purl, this is where you see those ridges on the back. You go in from the top, but now that needle is crossing over at the front. You're going to wrap that yarn around, you're going to pick up the loop, and you're going to again slide that off your needle. So you're always now on the purl row coming in from the top of the stitch rather than the bottom, and you're keeping that empty needle, or the needle that you're transferring to is going to be in front of the needle that's holding the stitches currently. So I'm going to work all the way down this row, just doing a purl row. You can write on your pattern, make sure that you do note things down. Do make sure that you write little notes to yourself. It will help. Tick off the rows that you've done. You know, make sure that you're counting those stitches, because if you check as you go along, then you know that you're keeping it right. So, you know, it does help just to double check and maybe triple check as well. Now, how long have we got left? We've still got a while left, haven't we? We're halfway through. So I am going to do the next row, which would be, to you, we've just done row 20. You're going to work to row 22 with your purl. I'm going to jump ahead. I will be undoing this later, so we're correct for next week. But I'm going to jump ahead to row 23. No, I'm not. I'm going to jump ahead to row 33, sorry. So this is the one, this is the first row where you need to change that bracket number. But we're back to the increase. So for anybody that missed it or you need a recap on that, I'm going to do an increased row. So to increase your stitches, obviously with the decrease, we started on the second stitch down. We just start with the top stitch. We're going to go into that stitch. Because we're on a knit row, you're crossing those needles over, so the empty needle is at the back again. We are going to take that yarn around as we normally do, and we are going to pick up that loop. Now, normally what we would do now is slide this stitch off the needle because we're transferring it over. But because we want to increase there, we're actually going to go with the loop that's on the what was empty needle. We're going to go back into that stitch and I work into the back of it. We're making that cross again, I will repeat this, yarn around, then you pick up the loop again. So when you take that from your needle, you've gone from 1 stitch to 2. That's how you do your increase. I'm going to do that again. So if I unpull that stitch, so we're back to the 1, I'm just going to pop that back on the needle. So your increased rows, needle into the stitch, make sure it's at the back of the stitch that's holding the needle that's holding those stitches, yarn around, slide the needle down to pick up the loop, but don't take the stitch off the needle that's containing all the other stitches. You're going to work your needle that you're transferring to back into the same stitch through the back of it there. You're going to go round with the yarn again, pick up that loop. Now you can slide that off the needle because you've created that extra stitch. That is how you increase. I will work this row to the end and show you the increase at the other end as well. And then I'm going to set you your homework before I move on to something a little bit different for the rest of the show. Because I am trying to cover as well to make sure that everybody watching, you know, if you missed out on the kit, then of course you can still craft along. If you've got your own needles, if you've got your own yarn as well, you can watch on rewind. Maybe you've recorded things. You know, maybe you know a friend that's got the kit as well, and you can maybe get together at some point. So I'm going right through to the end of the row. So I've only got 1 stitch left, and then we're going to increase at the other end. So to do that, we're now left with that final stitch. It's just a repeat of what we've just done. You're going to go into that stitch. Because it's knit, we're working from the bottom upwards. We're crossing over those 2 needles. We're wrapping around. We're going to pick up that loop, but we're not sliding that stitch off. We're going to go back into the back of it, yarn around, pick up that second stitch, and we've just increased again. So that is how you do your increased row. Now, everybody that started from the beginning, homework, as we said earlier on, took you to row 14. We've worked our way through to rows 20 to 22. So you can see that pattern emerging. Your homework this week, believe it or not, you're just repeating the process right the way through here. You are actually going to get right through to row 59. There's no new instructions. It's still knit, it's still purl. It's going to be either an increase, and it will say INC for increase, or it will be decrease where it says knit 2 together. So we've just gone through that during this hour. Get right through to row 59. It will tell you to cast off all stitches. Don't do that. We haven't done it yet. We haven't covered it. So that will be where we start next week. But we're going to skip ahead a little bit longer, a little bit further for this show as well. Now at home, whatever colour yarn you're working with, I'm going to say switch over to your other yarn. We're going to look at the tail for the cat, and you start with very, very few stitches. Now the only thing is, you've only probably, if you're a newbie, you've only got 1 set of knitting needles. So there's a couple of different things that we can do here. If you have got another set of knitting needles, you can keep your work on the knitting needles that you've got, or we can cheat a little bit. We can move our work right down to the end of the needle so it's out of the way. Use your second colour yarn. So I'm actually going to go with the dark grey that you should have. You might be knitting with this already, you might be knitting with the cream one. But we're going to look at the tail instructions, and the reason I'm doing that is because we are going to cast on again. And if we look, it says using the colour of your choice. More than one colour may be used, but obviously you've kind of limited at the moment. Cast on 4 stitches, so it's only 4 stitches to begin the tail. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you again how to make that loop, that slip knot, that starting stitch that we start with when we cast on. So with the yarn that I've got here, well, I'm right-handed, as I do keep reminding everybody, so I tend to hold a loop of yarn in my left hand, so I'm just literally looping that round, gripping it between my forefinger and thumb. I've got the tail end of the yarn here. You can have that a little bit longer if you like, if it makes it easier. We're going to grip that loop that I've created, take the tail end, and I'm going to take that and wrap that around the loop that's already there. There are different ways of doing this, but this is the way I do it. So I've created another kind of loose loop there. I'm going to take that end and just feed it through the loop that I've just created. So I'm pulling the end right through. And that forms our slip knot. So when you put your needle in there and you pull on the long end, the end that's attached to the yarn ball, that will slide up and create your first stitch. I'll do that one more time for anybody that's new watching. Now the yarn that you've got, this is a chenille, so you've got almost a cotton thread that runs all the way through that yarn, and then it's got a fluffy edge. Every now and again you might find that when you pull the thread that it catches a little bit. Don't worry, just give it a bit of a tug, and if it won't pull, just undo that slip knot and do it again. It might just be the way that you've got the yarn twisted a little bit. So we've formed that loop, we've got the tail end. We're going to wrap that around loosely, so we're forming a second loop at the base of the first one, and we're just going to feed that tail end through. So I'll just pull that through. And what we've got there then, the initial loop that we made is the one that slides. So we just put our needle into there, you pull on the end that is attached to the yarn ball, and that creates your first stitch. So because I've got my work on my other needle, this essentially now is my empty needle. Just push that down to the bottom, you'll be able to get away with this. So I'm going to take the yarn again with my 1 stitch on it. This is my starting point. I'm going to use the second needle and we're going to cast on. Now it does say only 4 stitches, so what you need to do, now I am using the yarn that's a little bit more difficult to see, but because we've only got 4 stitches, then hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. We're going to put the needle in from the bottom of the stitch, so we're crossing over, so just like you are when you're knitting. Take the yarn, you wrap it round so it's in between the cross, you pick up that loop, which is there, and instead of transferring from this needle here, which we'd normally do when we're knitting, we're actually going to pick up the stitch that we've just made and put it onto the needle that contained that first stitch. I'm going to do that again. So you go into the front of the stitch, just pick that loop up, take your yarn, wrap it around your needle, slide that through so you're picking that stitch up, and instead of slipping the stitch off here, we're going to place that stitch onto the needle, so you're increasing the amount of stitches every time onto that one needle. So you can see there, although it is a little bit fluffy the yarn, you can clearly see we've got 3 stitches, so we want 1 more, so we'll do this again. So needle into the bottom of the stitch because it's as though we're knitting, cross over so the empty needle is at the back, yarn around, slide down to pick up that loop which is there, and instead of sliding off this needle, we're going to place that stitch onto our holding needle. So now we've got the 4 stitches. So that is how you cast on. Depending on the pattern that you're doing, you will cast on various different stitches. Now when we finish today, because I've set you quite a lot of homework, obviously if you've only got the 1 set of needles and you just push your work down to the bottom, you are going to have to take this off. So this is kind of a practice before you get going, because if you're really, really good and you get your homework completed, you can go back and work on the tail as well. But next week, we've got another week, so we're going to go through this one again. But you know, practice makes perfect. So let's have a look. We've just cast on Now this is where it's a little bit different, because in the cat itself, I did say to you that the knit stitches were odd numbers and the purls were evens. We've actually switched a little bit here. It doesn't matter which way you do this, but we're going to start now with a purl. Now, if you've been working along with us, you know the purl is where you come in from the top of the stitch, you're crossing over those needles at the front, you're taking your yarn, you're crossing over, and because now we've finished casting on, we've picked that loop up and now we're transferring those stitches over. So we are sliding from one needle to the other. So let's go again. You're going from the top of the stitch, picking up the stitch itself, yarn around the needles, pick up the loop. So now we've got the 2 stitches, slide that stitch off the what is my left hand needle there, that's the holding needle. In again, so from the top, yarn around, pick up the loop, slide it off. From the top, yarn around, slide off. You've now transferred all those stitches onto your other needle. We've still got 4 stitches. Row 2, and we will go through this now, you're to knit 1, increase 1 twice. Now that is a little bit different. This is why I wanted to cover the tail tonight, because so far on the cat's body and the homework that you've got, you're only increasing at the beginning and the end of a row. This one is a little bit different. So if I switch those needles again, so I've now got the empty needle, we're going to work the knit. So knit 1, increase 1. So the first stitch, you're going into the stitch itself. Because we're knitting, we're crossing over with the empty needle to the back. Taking the yarn, we're going to do a proper knit stitch. So we're crossing that over, picking up the loop, and we're taking that stitch off. Now we're going to increase 1. So we're going into the stitch, crossing over, yarn around, pick up the loop, but because we're increasing, we don't slide that stitch off the needle. We're going to go back with our needle into the back of that stitch, and we're going to go yarn around again, pick up that loop, and now we can slide that off the needle. So we've just increased, so we've got 3 stitches there. Now it does say knit 1, increase 1 twice. So we've just done it once, so we're going to do it exactly the same again a second time. So the first stitch that we're going to do on the repeat is just a knit. So into the stitch, yarn around, we are actually going to pick the loop up and take this one off because there's no increase. And of course the next stitch we are going to increase. So from the bottom of the stitch, yarn around, pick up the loop, but don't slip that one off. You're going to go back into the back of that stitch, yarn around, then you pick up the loop and then you take it away. So you've actually increased twice there. So you should have 6 stitches. It says it in on the bracket, and that is correct. So you should have 6 stitches. So just check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches. That is how you increase. It's exactly the same method for increasing, but you will find you increase at different places in rows when you're knitting, depending on the pattern. This is still a very straightforward pattern, you know, there's nothing too complicated about it. But when you start to create different patterns and bobbles and lacy effects and cables and things like that, you do all sorts of wonderful things with your stitches. You cross them over, you increase them, you decrease them, you twist them, you do all sorts of wonderful things. We're not going to do this in this pattern because we want everybody to be able to achieve this. We'll just move on to the next row because it is straightforward. Row number 3 is your purl. So remember, with your purl, you come in from the top of the stitch, but your needles cross over, so the empty one is at the front. You go around with that yarn, you pick up that loop, and you slide straight off of your needle. And you repeat that process for every stitch. Every one is a purl. You're probably realising now why I worked with a different yarn for the demonstration, because the more I do here, the fluffier this seems to get. And it's probably a little bit harder for you to see, but I'm just repeating the whole process. When we do this again next week, I'll be using the alternative yarn so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so the purl row, you don't do any increase, you don't do any decrease. I do just want to move on to the next row because here it's changed from row number 2. We've just done knit 1, increase 1 twice. Because we've now increased those stitches, we can't do the same thing. It would be impossible because we've got too many stitches to work with. So now you can see it says knit 2, increase 1 twice. You can see the pattern forming, can't you? So we're back to that next stitch. Let's just show you how to do this. Working from the bottom of the stitch, you're going to be back to the knit row. We're going to go into there, form the cross so the empty needle is at the back, wool around your needle, slide to pick up the loop. You're going to take this one off because this is a knit stitch. You're going to do that again because it says knit 2. So it's 2 stitches without any increase at all. Exactly the same process. There we are, we've got the 2 stitches transferred over. Now we're going to increase. So now we're going to go in from the bottom of the stitch, yarn around, slide to pick up the loop, but don't slide it off the holding needle. We're going to go back into that stitch, yarn around, pick up the loop. Now we slide that off. We've just increased another stitch. It says to do this twice, so you know what's coming. You're back to knit 1, knit 2, and then we're going to increase again. So into the stitch, round, pick up the loop, but don't slide off the needle. Go back into the stitch, yarn round, pick up the loop. Now you can take it away from that needle. So what you've got now is 8 stitches. We'll double check that. It says it there on the pattern. We've got the 8 stitches. Let's just check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stitches. So you can see that we're increasing. If we just look at the pattern again here, I've just done row number 4. Row number 5 is a purl. You're not increasing or decreasing, so you're sticking to those 8 stitches. You can definitely see the pattern forming because the next one, you need to knit 3 before you increase, and you repeat that twice, and so on. So that's just a little bit of practice in advance for next week. We are going to redo the tail next week, and we're also going to show you how to put the cat together. So just to go through the homework again, we did finish last week, or the homework set last week was to stop at row number 14, which was here. So today we started on row 15. So we started those knitting together at the beginning, knitting together at the end. So you're decreasing those stitches. You will lose 2 stitches every time you do that decreased row. You have got your knit and purls in between where you don't do any increase or decrease. You'll get to a point, and it is at row 33, where you've gone from knitting 2 together to where you're back to increasing. That's why I wanted to run through that method again. We've just shown you with the tail how to increase. So what you're going to do, if I show you this piece here, now it is difficult to say which is the right and wrong side because it looks the same either way up, but there is a definite right and wrong side. In fact, if I show you with this piece again, you can see, can't you? You can see how the knit stitch runs up vertically. If I flip it over, you can clearly see the purl. It's a little bit harder. You probably can make it on the camera. It does look a bit different. That's the purl side. You can see the ridges. So just to run through the shaping of this, because it still doesn't look anything like a cat, but what you've got is the starting point. So you started with your cast on stitches. You started to increase, so you went outwards at the sides. We did a small amount of straight stitch, so it kind of levelled off a little bit. We've just started working that decrease, that knit 2 together. So you're going to get to a point where you stop decreasing. You'll do 1 or 2 rows of the knit and purl, then you're going to start increasing again. And then you're going to decrease. So you more or less, it's a repeat of what you did at the bottom half. So there's no new stitches to worry about in your homework. It is just repeating those methods. The only thing I say is, if you're new to this, you've never done it, please do stop when it says cast off all stitches. We'll do that together next week. So you should end up with a piece that looks just like that, but your stitches are still going to be on your needle. As I say, if you've just followed along with the tail, I know it seems a little bit odd, but you will need to take that off to continue with the main cut itself, but it's good practice for you. It's good practice with the increase, it's good practice with the stocking stitch, which is a knit row and a purl row. Yeah, if you want to start the tail again, that's up to you, but I am going to save that to next week. So we are going to just give you a little bit of recap on 1 or 2 other things as well, because we are getting close to the end of the show. If you missed out on this current kit, because it did sell out, we have got the next kit available. Now we're giving you 2 balls of yarn. The colours we've had this confirmed, the colours you're going to get are the ones that you can see here. So the purple and the grey. You're getting the metal knitting needles as well, which I believe are 4mm. Really nice, good needles there. Yeah, 30cm in length, so you've got plenty to play with there. All that, including the pattern as well, and of course 3 weeks of tutorial to create this for £7. Now, if your tension, and this is something important I do want to go over, if you're new to knitting, it's the same with crochet, your tension may be a little bit looser than someone that's a bit more experienced. Do not let that put you off. All that means is your stitches might look a little bit looser. So your finished project might be a little bit bigger. That means you go through your yarn a little bit quicker, but we are giving you here so much yarn that you've got more than enough to complete that project. If you're very good, you might find you can squeeze 2 hats out of this. £7 is the price, 337959 is the item number. Now I'm just hearing we've had 1 or 2 questions coming as well, so I have no idea what they are yet, so we'll see if we can go through these. Right, we've got one from Sheila. Hi, what is the square with the holes for sale? Do you know what? I'm really glad Sheila's mentioned this actually. Yes, I can explain. It's called a blocking board. I want to buy this for myself actually. I meant to get it last week and forgot. Let's bring a picture in. This is really, really good. When you knit or crochet, sometimes the pattern will tell you to block your pieces. You won't have to do this with this project because we are starting at the beginning. By blocking, sometimes depending on the yarn you use, things come out a little bit misshaped. Let's go to crochet a little bit. I know we're knitting tonight, but let's say we're going to a granny square or a hexagon or something that we've created with the crochet. It doesn't look, depending on the yarn, quite the right shape. What you do, you tend to damp down the yarn itself and you work that to the blocking board. So you use the pegs to pin down your piece of work. You will get perfect shaping. You allow that to dry on the board, and when we take the pegs out, you've got the perfect shape. So you will use that under some circumstances, but not all. So it's not an essential for everyone, but because I love my crochet and I'm moving forward with different yarns and things, this is something I will definitely be buying for myself. And it's a great price as well, because that is a wooden blocking board with 12 pins. That is a really, really good buy at £24.99. 578242 if you do want to go for that one. Thank you, Sheila. That's a really good question. We've had another question coming in from Jackie. Jackie is saying, please can you go through the number of stitches? Yeah, right. Now this is the one where I did say to you, grab your pen. So let me just run through those again. So I've got 2 copies here actually. So the instructions for the pattern are completely correct. You don't have to worry about that. There's no wrong instructions here. The only slight error, and I do say I'm very sorry, it's my fault. I typed this up at about 2 o'clock in the morning after I'd been at work all day, and I think I just got mixed up with my decrease and increase. The change that you need to mark on your pattern starts at row 33. So if we look above that, first of all, you can see you've been knitting together, so you've been decreasing. We got to 16 stitches. When we get to row 33, we're actually increasing at the beginning and the end of the stitch. So where it says 14 in brackets, you should have gone up 2 from the 16. So you want to change that to 18. Just write it in, just change that number. Nothing wrong with the instructions, it doesn't change that at all. It's simply that stitch number. The next row, because you're doing your stocking stitch, it's going to be the same. It's going to be 18. The next row after that, because we're increasing again, that's going to be 20. The stocking stitch row, no increase, no decrease, so that's going to be 20. Every time we increase, just add on, you know, so if we're, what did I just say, we're 20 there, so that one's going to be 22, 22 on that next one. We're still increasing, so it's 24, 24. Then we start knitting together. So where we get to row 51, that is correct in the bracket. So it's in between row 33 to, what did I just say, 44. Now I have changed it on another pattern, but I don't think you can read, because I've written over the top, it's not very clear. So you can see there, row 33, you can see there, 18, 18, 20, 20, 22, 22, 24, 24. That's it. That's it. That's all you need to change. As I say, I can't repeat this enough. It does not change any of the pattern or the instructions. It's simply just that bracket number, which is just a guide, really. It's just a guide to make sure that if you are counting your stitches, that you're keeping track of that. So it is worth amending that. I'll tell you what I'll do as well, actually. I will put a copy on my Facebook page as well, I think. I think that will help as well, yes. Yeah, so if you find me on Facebook, I'll apply it to my various different pages. If you just look for me on my TV page or my crochet page, which is the Sugar Buttons one, Get Hooked with Sugar Buttons, I'll put the amendments on there. So if anybody's really, really worried or you can't record or whatever, but yes, please don't worry about that. It is simply, that's all you need to change. We've had another email in from Maria as well. Just to let you know, oh, do you know, this is lovely. I'm so pleased. Maria, thank you so much. Maria is enjoying all of the Craftalongs. And her granddaughter can't say it properly, so we're calling it Craft Academy. That is a great name, actually. It really, really is. I love that. Do you know, can I say a big, big thank you, because there's so much work gone in behind the scenes, putting these shows together. Hayley is working herself into the ground because she's doing 3. We've got Matthew doing the painting. I'm doing the crochet and the knitting as well. Do you know, we've had such wonderful feedback. 1 or 2 of you have had 1 or 2 issues. We've sorted that out. We've changed the kits for the future as well. So please do stick with it. Please send those questions in if you've got any more. Contact us on Facebook as well, of course, if you've got anything to ask there as well. Don't miss out on the new kit starting from the 7th of August, the bobble hat. Get yourself ready for winter. Oh, you could be making your own Christmas presents this year. Thank you for joining me again. I hope you enjoyed the football. I've been hearing wonderful things about the scores. Thanks, that's the last live hour for tonight. I'll see you.